Chapter 11. My Father, Sansan Johnson. Ma had her baby, a cute little tyke. Father had not married Mrs. Hilcher, but everything pointed to that because she was into our activities as though she were one of us. With the best of optimism at work for me, I could not see how Father could get back Ma, even if he wanted it so. So I had to reconcile myself to the possibility that my new mother would be Betty Hilcher, and likely or not, she wouldn't remain that for very long. Father had men working for him once more. They had cleared the rest of our hillside land and were having a good bash at the part of the Hilcher farm which Father had leased. Father was putting in yams by the acres. He was not just doing it because the land was there. He had looked into the future, market forecasting, I think they called it, and had decided that the demand would be right. No longer was this father of mine doing things by whims and impulses. He was back to his original form, which had rocketed him from poverty to Robin Hill. He had done even better. He had bought Jack Gregson's land. Jack, who had not sold it to Jake even under pressure, had sold it to us, offered it. We had friends left. They were rallying behind us now. Jake was feeling the brunt of our ascendancy, yet we had hardly touched the rake as yet. Arlene told me, just mentioned it unwittingly, that he and Ma had quarreled. About us or over us. Have it whichever way you like. About Father, really. Apparently, Jake wanted to cut our grass by interfering with our progress, but Ma told him hands off. They quarreled about that. Arlene and Brad were being nicer to me. Some revelations even to babes? Maybe, but in fact, take their cue from adults. Unwittingly, Ma was giving them their cues. Now that Father had his old backbone back, she was proud. The old embers of her love had caught, were catching fire again. I mean, even though she had another husband. But he was no husband. He was nothing but a usurper. I'd bet Ma had married him simply because she had started something which she could not control. Father, oh father, he was jack of all trades, plunging into the bush with a man to help him. He had sawn up lumber posts, sills, joists, rafters, and boards as he would need them. He was planning to build that store on Gregson's land, and this was what Ma and Jake had quarreled over. Father was moving too close to him, dangerously close to Jake. The foundation of the store was cast, the frame put up. We were raring to go. After the store, in a year or two after, would come our home, another Robin Hill. Father planned it in his head and discarded or altered his plan, then planned again. Watching his face, I saw it take shape there. It was going to be something to be talked about. Our yams draped the hills, feathering as good yams should. We had added to our family of animals 2 cows. People were watching us, watching and talking. They were saying the very best about us. The strain was on at Robin Hill. We had everything before us. Then one night it happened. Father didn't want to go to sleep, nor I either. Something was bothering him, and when he was like that, I got the itch too. How about a game of dominoes, Rami? He said at last. Right, Father. It was 12:20 a.m., past Friday into Saturday, but so what? There would be no school on the next day. We played a dozen or so games, but Father couldn't concentrate. His mind was elsewhere, and I beat him every time. We played on, and yet we couldn't get sleepy. Then suddenly he jumped to his feet. What? He said. My God, what is it? He wasn't talking to me. It seemed that it was the mysterious night to which he had spoken. What, Father? I said, alarmed for him and rising too. What is it? Premonition or something, Rami. All night it's been coming at me. Robin Hill. Something's wrong there. But what? I must go. He said nothing more, but ran outside in his shirt and pants, but with no more on, not even socks to his feet. Before I could gather myself together and join him, he had already got Marble and was on her back riding through the gate. "Father!" I called. "Father!" But he was gone. The thundering hoofs were all I heard, and his figure too. I saw that bending, urging the mare on. Had he flipped? Did he love Ma so much? Was it the baby which had hurt him so, eaten away his sanity? What was he going to do? I must go after him. I had an idea. Lizette the mule. I ran and loosened her and was on her back in 5 or 10 seconds, and was after father before you could have said Jack Robinson. I well knew that the mule would never catch up with Marble, but I'd get there in time before father did anything silly, such as insulting then smashing up Jake badly. Reaching the main road, I was tearing along its asphalt surface at what I considered to be top speed, but there was still no sign of father. Not until I got to the gate of Robin Hill and saw the glare. I saw father in that glare, silhouetted against its fierceness, the glare of Robin Hill burning. This was his premonition. Something was wrong, he had said, and known. His heart had never left it then. The entire building seemed to be engulfed in flames, lighting the night sky, and father, he was not using the road which was to Circuitious. He was cutting up the hill. I followed him up, sending kick after kick into Lizette's flanks, but already the mule was out of wind and was merely trotting. When I got there, I found no one on the outside. Had they all perished? Frightened by the flames, Marble was just running off to a safe distance. The flames were at the same time beautiful and ugly, leaping orange, red, and yellow and crackling in firecracker madness. The smoke swished up in twisting, boiling coils. "Father!" I called, running around to the back. Then I saw him. He came out of the door carrying Ma and her baby, depositing them on the stairs. He saw me. "Take care of them, Remy," he said. He was like a madman. No, like a monster even. His eyes were red from the fire's fierce reflection and his teeth intensely white. He disappeared again. Ma had almost succumbed, sitting there almost insensible, coughing her chest out. Although the baby was wailing, I didn't think she knew that she cradled it in her arms. It was there in the beginning, and she was holding on to it with dear life, but I don't think she knew it. Trying as I did, I could not take it away from her, but she let me lead her from the steps away from the dangerously escalating flames. Then father came back with Arline and Brad, one under each arm. He pitched them out of the door like so much raw meat, and they rolled from the steps onto the cool grass, waking totally only then. He was on fire. Father was. I saw him beating the flames off his shirt. "Father!" I called, but he did not hear me, or did not want to hear me. "Merton!" Ma screamed out, bawled, "Merton!" He looked, saw us, smiled beautifully, no diabolically, and was gone again, into the doomed house. The fool! Gone back. Why? For Jake? I appraised the blaze. There was no part of the building that was not ablaze now. The kitchen area had collapsed. The fire had likely started there. From the inside somewhere, something like a heavy beam crashed. I was too afraid for father. I ran around the house wildly. Then a figure came tumbling out of a window, a screaming figure partly engulfed in flames. I rolled him over in the dew-wet grass, snuffing out his flames. Then he only smoked and whined. "Father!" I said, "Father!" But it wasn't he. It was Jake Hibbertson. I jumped up. "Father!" I hollered. "Father!" There was no answer, and there would be none. And there was no point in going in after him. There was now no doorway, no window, only fire, leaping, diabolical fire. I knew then that he could not come out again. I stood there galvanized by the fact, the awful fact, and through the fire I thought I saw him, my father, lying on the floor, wreathed in flames that were destroying him, burning, but not laughing, not crying, not screaming, not even writting. only laughing serenely, laughing at fate, laughing that he had died as no other but as Sun Johnson. A hand was on my shoulder. It was Ma, her face sooty and orange and wet, wet with tears for father. He loved us, she said softly, religiously. I'm sorry, Remy. He saved us, but he did not save himself. It was then that I realized that Arlene and Brad were crying. I put my arms around both of them. The house just squatted down, all of it into flames. No longer did the ladder have to reach high, for they had won every part of the house. The villagers were running up now. For me, from that moment to Sunday was complete. For me, from that moment to Sunday was a complete blank. For me, time had stopped. I only remember Donna Ray bending over me on my bed. There was a glass of something in her hand. At first her face was blurry, then definite, harsh, then sweet. You must get up now, she said. Eh? You must go to the funeral. Funeral? It swam back slowly. Yes, father had perished in the flames. I jumped up. What day is it? Sunday. Your ma and sister were here several times, but they couldn't get you up. Oh my God, several times? Nobody could get you up. You only moaned and kept your eyes shut tight. Her face was everything to me. It was a Madonna's. Get up, she said, struggling with me. I got off the bed. I could hear the church bell tolling. That was the custom in our village. At the death of a prominent villager, the bell tolled for him. The number of years he had lived was in that toll, and again when he was to be buried, the bell would toll again, as now. Donna Ray was dressed in black, and so was her mother, who was pacing the veranda crying. Although I hadn't eaten since Friday, I was far from being weak. I dressed, but my sorrow was more than I was capable of showing. It was twofold and very deep. At this time, I had had to fail father. His funeral I didn't even know until now. I could have missed it. His funeral, and I hadn't prepared it. At this last supreme moment, I had failed him. Mrs. Hiltra was crying her eyes out. She was a sight. I didn't know how to comfort her. I can't say if I had ever felt so sorry before for anyone. Twice she had been thwarted, once by Ma and now by death and Ma combined. Because the man she loved had died, and she didn't really know if he loved her. Maybe for father it was Ma all the time, forever all the time. Together they and I set out for the village, but on the way we met a car which was on its way down. Ma was in it, on her way to have one last try at getting me up. She invited us in, the Hilchers, all of us. Death had removed status. We climbed in. In all my life, I had never before seen so many of the villagers in any one spot as I saw at the funeral. The church was full, and the spill from it so great that they could have filled a couple more churches. Along the road, cars were lined up for nearly a quarter of a mile, and in the yard were more of them, plus saddled mules and donkeys that were hitched everywhere. Father was lying in state at the altar of the church. I went up to the coffin and stopped, but I did not open it to look. I couldn't. I smelled him, though, the charred him. We sat together as a family in the front pew. Jake was conspicuously absent. Maybe his burns were worse than I had first thought. The last rites were conducted by the Rev. Ledbetter, but I must confess that much of it went unheard by me until the reverend gentleman began to spread on his praises of father a mite too quickly. The last rites were conducted by the Rev. Ledbetter, but I must confess that much of it went unheard by me until the reverend gentleman began to spread on his praises of father a mite too thickly. It was then that I began to listen to all the hypocritical things which he had to say. By far, he said, father was the best man in the village, the ideal father, loved by all, respected by all. He had lived for others, a truth, and he would be richly rewarded for all he had done. Rewarded? How? While he was dead and lying in a coffin? Loved, he said. Loved by whom? I wanted to jump to my feet and shout him down, but instead tears rolled down my cheeks. But I wasn't crying. I don't consider tears alone an act of crying. You have to be sniffling too. Then it came time for us to take father out and inter him. Ma nudged me, and I knew that I was one of the pallbearers. The others were men of the village and surroundings, friends of father's and ma's. We took him out of the church and they led me on to this big black car with doors swung open, a hearse, a Cadillac hearse. This was how father should be rewarded, to be driven in a big Cadillac, although during his lifetime he hadn't been privileged to drive in one. I rebelled. Once again my mind was mine. I stopped. The others looked askance at me, but I wasn't minding them. I looked back. Ma was just behind me, crying. "What's this for?" I asked her. "The hearse, Remy. To take your dad to his last resting place." Last resting place? That was another thing. Where, Ma? Where? Everybody was looking at me in a funny way, and none of them was breathing. Not much anyway. And you knew that they were afraid of me, what I was going to do. Rev Ledbetter hovered there uneasily, his mouth open in a beef ribbed. Oh, I wasn't minding him or anybody. At the family plot, Remy, you know, behind the house, she knew too. She was afraid to use the words Robin Hill. All the Johnsons before father had been buried in a small enclosure at Robin Hill, some of them entombed. Let me explain. Robin Hill was not at the start a huge chunk of land. It was first a small tract which father had inherited from grandfather and had added to over the years by buying around him, so that a piece of Robin Hill was in the family for generations and our ancestors were entrenched there. But the house, the land, whose land now? Not Johnson land. I could not do this to father. He would not want this. It would be like insulting the dead who could offer no objections. With my arm pressure or lack of it, I indicated to the other pallbearers that I wanted the casket put down. Nobody disputed it. We rested it on the ground. Ma and I had a private parley. I asked her where was Jake. They had busted up, she said. The fool had accused father of having set the fire. What he insisted was father doing there just at the right time. Ma couldn't take that. Jake had moved back into his old house while Ma and Arlene and Brad were staying at the Rev Ledbetters. Of all the dirty things that Jake could have said of father, the man who had died to save his life, but there'd be time enough to take him up on that. "Ma," I said, "we can't bury father there. It isn't Johnson land anymore, and that Jake." Shedding tears and with her lips bitten against the anguish, she nodded consent. "We must respect him even though he's dead. I know you still love him too." "Remy, Remy," she said and hugged me so tightly that for a moment she took my breath away. I wasn't thinking. "Please forgive me. We will bury him at River Bottom." "Yes, son, do it. Do it for him." I went back to the crowd and addressed them. "I know the inconvenience I shall be causing folks," I said, "but father would have liked to be buried on at River Bottom, so there's going to be a slight change in the program." "But the grave's already—" the Rev Letter began to say, but somebody touched his arm and silenced him. I didn't like the hearse either, but I wouldn't be squeamish. Had I thought about it before, though, had I been conscious and had prepared the funeral, father would have ridden atop our cart drawn by marble. But I would go along with this part of it. The Rev Ledbetter was about to voice something, but again somebody stopped him. What a procession we had down to River Bottom, those people who were on foot running alongside and ahead of the vehicles. Men, willing men, were running along with shovels. There had been a new grave dug. It was dusk when the last of the people began to leave. Suddenly a light appeared in the windows of our house, mine now, and I went over to see who was there. Ma and Arlene and Brad followed me. It was Donna Ray. She had lit the lamp for me, and she was waiting. Standing there beside the table with the lamp lighting one side of her face more than the other, she was mysterious and pristine. I walked over and put my arm around her waist, the first time, but for me and her also it had been done many times in our hearts. None of us blanched. Turning to Ma, I said, "I won't. Can't go back to school. I'll be here for another year or so, and then will move up to the village. I will build a house too, after the store starts paying. You must come and live with us then, Donna Ray and me. She knew I had turned only 17, but she knew that I was a man, and she didn't dispute my words. Still shedding tears, she endorsed what I had said. She came over and took Donna Ray away from me and hugged and kissed her. Then Donna Ray went home. Then Ma and Arlene and Brad. I was alone. Suddenly, a sheet of rain descended from the hill and beat against the building, coming so soon after Father had been put under, as a seed is planted and watered. It was a symbol to me that Son Johnson had not really died. He would be back. He was still there.